Wasn't it difficult first entering the Ethiopian market?
One thing I've learned in Ethiopia is there are also places where technology is not the main thing. It won't be the main thing, and it can't fix a lot. The question is, can Ethiopia really change with one fit?
Amity, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
How long have you been in Ethiopia? Maybe 10 years? What made you stay longer in Ethiopia?
Ethiopian founders don't necessarily pitch great in the Western understanding. Working 85 hours a week to start their business and try and train them how to pitch to a couple of white people is weird. They don't need that.
What is the biggest advice that you can give to entrepreneurs that are working in Ethiopia?
Entrepreneurship alone cannot solve Ethiopia's problems around. But that being said, to a lot of young entrepreneurs, I would say get a job first.
Do you feel the impact that you have now is better and more than the impact you've had before?
Beverage is super fun. It's a super fun industry to be in. When we started that campaign, within 4 months, everyone referred to that drink as Takeshi. At Ada, we knew it worked because we could see people drinking it. I still get excited when I see people drinking it. Investor with a small factory that could go from 12 staff to 25, if he was able to get a 10% tax break, that's a huge engine of growth.
Do you think we should be scared of AI as an Ethiopian? Amity, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
All right. I think we can start by letting us know who you are. Like, you're not really famous in this scene. Like, I know you have a very powerful impact in Ethiopia in different industries. We will talk about that, but you're not into media coming out talking about your work, maybe.
Yeah, no, it's actually something I've dealt with in the last couple of years because I never really wanted the spotlight. For me, it was about spotlighting the companies that I founded. So I was the founding CEO of Komari, which, Arada Bira. I think hopefully some of you guys have tried. And then also my work at Awash, it was always about showcasing those brands. And then the teams that I had extraordinary founding teams, with me at Komari. And then now, we do a lot to showcase the companies that we work with at Malela. But for me, it's more important to showcase that. And it's more important to be able to showcase Ethiopians because I really feel that their stories aren't shared enough.
All right.
And I'd rather promote that than myself. The one time I do sometimes step out is on gender, right?
All right.
I can be an example of me, but I also really want to promote examples of Ethiopian women that are successful.
Amazing. So I learned that your impact is big. And I was trying to highlight it and talk to people about you and tell them that how impactful your works are, because I know about Arada and people know about Arada, especially during the time that it was launched in Addis in Ethiopia. You have a lot of other important works, say impactful works in Ethiopia. Tell us about those works. And I just want to know how that came about and the realization of the whole process. I just want to know about those.
So you're starting with the easy questions? I think by far the thing I'm the most proud of is the over 120 Ethiopians that I've had the chance to really train and mentor. And that would be from when I got here in 2013 at Awash all the way through to today. And one of the things I love most about Malela is we have an opportunity to do a lot of training for other companies, other organizations. So I get to interact with kind of the next generation in Ethiopia almost every day. My teams were actually running training programs now. But I've been here long enough to start being able to see that generation that I mentored 12 years ago have an impact now. And I get to, be incredibly proud of them. Some of them are my clients. So I have to pitch for work, my former interns, which is a huge pleasure. And, it's, to me, however successful you want to be. And, I think a lot of people think this is related to a social mission, but for me, it's really not, is to understand your market and to also understand the teams you're working with and really spend a lot of time to get to know and understand them, because then you can help them make an impact. They help you make an impact. And more importantly, you learn from each other long term. And you think about new ways that you can change industries and hopefully, change some things in Ethiopia as well.
Isn't it tiring, like, to interact with young people whose idea of business in the world is really maybe very narrow, and you have this experience from different corners of the world, and you're in Ethiopia trying to mentor these kids? Isn't that tiring?
I came to Ethiopia as the commercial manager of Awash Wine. So I interacted with a lot of Arogit and Shmagale, like a lot of older people, many of whom I deeply respected. But what I would say is, with this younger generation, I think there is a lot of kind of misconceptions about success, but that's not just Ethiopian. That seems to be a kind of Gen Z wide phenomenon, that they're also under tremendous social pressure to succeed quickly in ways that, if you look at actual pathways to success, unless you are the next TikTok star, I'm aiming for that, by the way, at 40, are not really feasible. So it's really about putting in the work. One difference I would say is, I think in Ethiopia, in especially some older generations, and I would include kind of my own generation, there's this idea that the pie won't grow, that, an overall kind of thought that, everyone has to take from the same amount of space. And I think that comes from kind of some of Ethiopia's history, etc. And this new generation seems to have a better understanding that if you create opportunities or grow the economy, it grows for everyone. It's not a set pie that everyone is taking from. It's about the fact that there is potential for real growth. And I think that's something this next generation understands in a way that maybe older generations struggle with.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't it difficult first entering the Ethiopian market? You're from the US.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very developed market, and the understanding of the ecosystem and how people interact with each other in the business world is very different from this one in Ethiopia. So wasn't it really difficult?
I think so. For me, the first thing, I'm from New York. We are not known for our tigist. And one thing I've learned in Ethiopia is tigist. And I think if you really want to have an impact in business, it's about understanding your market.
Yeah.
So for me, I actually kind of spent less time in the boardroom the first couple of years I was here, and more time in the markets, in Segabets, in groceries, in Piazza, which most of them are now gone, but in Sarabet, all over, not the fancy ones, right? Because that's not where Awash was consumed. It was in your neighborhood meat houses. I have to always watch out how I say Sega, because if I say it wrong, it's something else. But so I spent 4,000 hours.
All right.
And from that, you gain a real respect for the market and also an understanding of what that market needs. And I think people use the word market and it seems really fancy. Market is the dude that owns the Segabet, right? And or the lady that owns the Segabet or the grocery, right? And the people in it, and the people that are consuming your product or other products. And that's not different. In anywhere you are, whether it's New York City, whether it's Kigali, because I also spent 6 years in Kigali, or Nairobi or here, taking the time to understand your market at that level, at the level of Tesfaye Segabet, is the most important thing you need to succeed. And for me, what really helped is that I love it. I really enjoy it. I love figuring out how people are doing things, why people are doing things. One of the things that drives me nuts when I'm dealing with clients, because we do work with FMCG, so fast moving consumer goods, food, fancy word for snacks and food and beverage, is you have founders in this space also that think they're smarter than the guy that runs the Segabet or the woman that runs the souk. And to me, also having interacted with them, these are some of the smartest people in Ethiopia. They've also survived and are often supporting family and extended family off of a space smaller than this studio. And they're doing it effectively. They're sending kids to school. they're really the heart of the community in their neighborhood as well. And if you don't respect those people and you don't not only respect them, but find them interesting and worth having a conversation with, you've already lost. And, one of my favorite things to do, go into a Sega bet and ask the Sega bet owner about Sega, because you will get, Beta Morenia, you will get a 2-hour speech about meat in Ethiopia, what is best, why it's best, why his is best, why his neighbor's is terrible. And these people are experts at these things, and everyone is an expert at something. And if you want to really have conversations that will matter, both to find opportunities to add value for them and also to make money in a market, it's really difficult to do if you aren't deeply curious and also want to have a lot of fun with the people that you're trying to sell something to.
Absolutely. From the point that you mentioned about the small businesses that we have around in different places across Ethiopia, and I am really amazed at the fact that you are appreciating their endeavor, what they're doing, and I kind of feel like you have learned something from the whole process. But the understanding we have of them is these are small businesses supporting 1 or 2 family members, or maybe 10 family members, but now more than that. For a person who came
around 12 to 15, up to 50 for some of them. Anyway, go on.
For a person who came from a developed world, I'm not trying to be negative about this, but for someone who has seen the vastness of that market, how could it be really that surprising? And do you think it's impactful in that way?
I think, almost all economies are run by small business people. Right. So, and that's really where the heart of your economy is. I also, I'd spent 6 years in Rwanda before here. So I'd spent a lot of time there. Actually, I worked in dairy there. I worked in hospitality, and then spent a lot of time building my own companies there as well in home decor and fashion. So I kind of got that curiosity early on from that. But, I think anyone coming in from outside in Ethiopia, I would say this actually about a lot of foreigners, is it's very easy to get trapped sort of in bole or in kind of, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, I'm not knocking bole. I love Sishu as much as anyone, but it's also can be scary. There's language barriers. And for me, my interns were really important in that, right? They were the ones that helped me translate. And I think a lot of them realized that it was worth being curious because I was so curious. But for me, observing that for the 4,000 hours that I observed it is where I got the idea for Aranda. So if you take the time to really engage with a society, you can figure out things that other people may not have yet figured out that can solve problems that maybe other people haven't seen. And as an outsider, I love taking Ethiopians to Kenya as well, because as soon as you get out of a place, you see everything differently. You notice stuff that if Ethiopians coming to New York would see a ton of stuff that I didn't notice, right? Because it's the air we breathe, it's our culture. So I was able to see some stuff in Ethiopia because I'm not from here. And make sense of it because I had, my interns that were kind of my guides to put together a picture that led to Aradabira and also led to Awash Tekeshino, which was another campaign. And when you build that trust and those relationships, I have a member of my team that started as an intern with me 11 years ago that still works with me. And he now sees that when he's working with our clients in FMCG. So I don't think, the industrialization or sophistication of a society matters that much when you're trying to understand what will work in business. I think it has to work in that country. You have to figure out what will work for them, right? And I love doing that. I love getting to engage. I mean, we've had clients from gum to oatmeal to, healthcare and some of the ones, Globe Doc. And what amazes me is a lot of times the founders themselves have almost never been to the market. They're afraid. And it's like, guys, if you don't talk to, if Globe Doc, I give Kudo a lot of trouble for this. Go talk to parents. Stop talking to MasterCard. Talk to parents.
Wow.
right? Talk to students. Go find, what will really matter to people, right? If you're selling gum, talk to the souk owner. Talk to, a kid that's going to buy sticker, right? So if you're not talking to those people, you don't know what's happening. And it's very difficult to win in a market if you don't actually understand why people want your product or why they don't, which is a lot of times why people don't want to talk to them. And that's true anywhere in the world. That doesn't have to be New York.
Amazing. Can I assume, or am I okay in assuming that Amity is moving into impact now? Because maybe it may be naive to understand these things, but you worked in that area of beverage. Well, you've been talking about Awash, Takashino, Arada, all of it. And now I see you with these young people impacting the lives of individuals across the country, in working in health, agriculture, education, and areas like that. So do you feel the impact that you have now is better and more than the impact you've had before?
I think, for me, when it comes to impact, it's like when people try and get me to be on panels as a female CEO, I'm just a CEO. Like, yes, I'm a CEO that happens to be female, but I don't have any particular experience dealing, working on gender, etc. Komari created 200 direct and 150 indirect jobs. For me, that's what really matters, is job creation. And, from my first intern classes at Awash all the way up to today, where I always will be focused is on working with Ethiopians, either founders or staff, who will have skill sets that can benefit the future of Ethiopia, whether they decide to go work for BGI or an impact fund. And that's really where I try to focus. I really enjoy working with small businesses and with founders and startups. I also find, there's my experience and the experience of my team, because I have, 5 Ethiopian staff, can really benefit them. But when it comes to, the ones that I engage in more in healthcare and in agriculture in particular, I come to that as a commercial investor with a background in private equity and venture capital. And yes, I think it can create impact, but I also think I can make money, and I can make money for my investors in the education space and some of the others. And this is something, it's a hard truth. When I talk to founders is, if you are not generating in dollars right now in Ethiopia, and I know this because I've talked to many venture capitals, right? And many people kind of looking at Ethiopia right now, in order to beat kind of the current inflation in the birr and make market returns, you have to have above 95% as a growth rate. And that's just not feasible. Also, you're still not sure really if you're going to get your dollars out, right? So if you're a commercial investor looking in Ethiopia, unless you're in certain sectors, it's really kind of wait and see still. It's changing, and I am hearing change, especially because this government really is putting effort into the policy changes to, manage some of the inflation, et cetera. But for me, the 2 companies I'm focused on are generating 100% US dollar revenue, because that's what I can sell, right? In education and other sectors, it's impact investors that I want to work with. And what I want to do is try and bring in some new impact investors into Ethiopia. It's one of the reasons why I love, working with GRV and EDTF as well, is I think Ethiopia could do with some more voices in the impact space from investors. It's pretty dominated right now by a few, and they're doing good things, but competition is always good no matter what sector you're in. And yes, I believe in impact, but I also believe in making money, and I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing if I hadn't been able to do both of those things. But the heart of all of it, which has nothing to do with impact for me, because I'm also selfish, I'm training my team now so I have the best team in the future. Same reason I did it at Komari. Am I proud that 3 of them are now getting masters in Europe? Some of them are coming back. I have ones working all over the industry, sure. But I was building them at that time to make them the best for me. And that's what the private sector is meant to do. That's why you're meant to invest in training. It's not because it's nice and it's impact. It's because you want someone that means you can work less, right? I now, I can focus on coming up with new companies, new ideas, being on this podcast, judging at GRV, because my team can do 80% of my client work now.
Right.
And that's selfish. Maybe someday I'll go to a spa and they can keep working, but that's the objective. That's why you build staff.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a misconception that that's impact. That's just an economy.
Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to work,
Definitely. So, as someone who was in the industry for the ecosystem for the last maybe 20 years, if we consider the time that you spent in the US working in different areas.
These lights are going to make me look tremendously out of it as well. Anyway, yes, go on.
Not really.
Yes,
that's not going to happen.
Yes.
So, what is the biggest advice that you can give to entrepreneurs that are working in Ethiopia? Like, we have people with understanding of Ethiopia's economy, Ethiopia's ecosystem of entrepreneurship, but from the lens of someone who is from outside Ethiopia, I know you have that understanding as to how the system is, the entrepreneurship ecosystem is operating. So, what advice do you have for those people to actually make it in the ecosystem?
I think, first of all, on a wider level, I'm an entrepreneur. I have 5 companies. I obviously, really like entrepreneurship, but I think there's a lot of push to support entrepreneurship in areas where entrepreneurship can't be. So there is, without a robust private sector, which includes large enterprise, which includes government, formal employment, entrepreneurship alone cannot solve Ethiopia's problems around employment, job creation, economic growth, right? And a lot of people don't like to hear that. It's companies that are the size of like Komari or, much larger BGI, whatever, that are the real ones that create long-term jobs. Within that, I also think, as I said, the owner of a souk or the owner of a hair salon or the owner of something is the heart of any economy, right? They should be creating 70% of the jobs. And that's not a sexy startup. That's not a fintech. That's a dude with a segabet. That's a dude with a HVAC company. So the real focus should be there. And I would say, in terms of one of the other real drivers, which is debt, would be, and it's where I'm excited to see the dynamism in the banking industry here is hopefully really getting some capital released for non-sexy businesses, middle businesses that really usually are a big part of the lending sector in any country. But that being said, to a lot of young entrepreneurs, I would say get a job first. Go get a job for a couple of years. The experience you get in an office is important, even if it's painful and you don't like it and you're not the center of attention. And then also be willing to partner, right? I'm sure you've seen this. There are times when, we're doing a training and you have 5 companies with almost the same, and they're all lovely people, but we're together, guys. Like, it's not, all of you fighting often for the same donor money to do almost the same thing when your teams are small and you're very early stage makes no sense to a private investor. We're together. Buy out each other. Often they're too small to even do that, but it's a little crazy to have everyone going off thinking they're going to be the next big thing in education, in ag tech. Guys, we're together. You're all smart. You're all young. It's good. And I would also say, don't expect success to come quickly, right? As I said, I think you've got a lot of TikTok stars. I'm too old for TikTok, but I see it. My team shows it to me. And there's this kind of picture that a lot of Gen Z people are giving of being wildly successful at like 26 or 19 or whatever. And the reality is it's hard work. Batam Seda. And the entrepreneurs that I've chosen to work with and invest in are all older. They're all, I think, how old is Kiru? Kiru might be a little bit younger. I think he's late 20s.
No.
Okay, so there's a few Mark Zuckerbergs everywhere.
Maybe 32, rather. Early 30s.
But the majority are older. The
Absolutely.
majority, this isn't their first business.
Yeah.
It's probably their second or their third business. They've learned from that. And not just the product. They've learned how to work with other people, how to negotiate, how to anticipate challenges. And that experience, and it's unpopular to say these days, but that's invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you meet people that are wise beyond their years, but you'll be so much better now, right? I know now, looking back, I would have been a much better CEO of Kamari now than I was when I was CEO.
Wow. Okay.
Age matters. The lessons you learn matter.
Yeah.
And the other thing would be, as you're going through that, and maybe you are going to go through a couple of companies, or maybe you are the next Mark Zuckerberg of Ethiopia. I've met one or two that may fit that. Learn. Take the time to reflect on what you're learning every day, how you're managing a team, the challenges you're facing, because the learning you bring, even if that company becomes wildly successful, but it probably won't. So the next ones, that's the real value in your first couple of companies.
Nice. Amazing. I mean, this is not common for an entrepreneur in Ethiopia to have that understanding of the complexity of the system. But sometimes you may have an idea and you may think about only the idea, then you invest.
Yes.
There is lack of understanding the complex system around it, the bureaucracy and things like that. So,
I also say, if you have an idea, explain it to your ayat, grandmother. Yeah.
All right.
Is it ayat? Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I'm trying not to mess up
Yeah.
amats and ayats. If you can't explain it to your grandmother, it's not a good idea.
If you cannot explain
it to your grandmother, first of all, you don't know what you're doing enough.
No.
And your grandmother will usually tell you if she doesn't understand. So if you can't explain it to your grandmother and she says, that's a good idea, I see that, you have more work to do.
Brilliant. I remember a cousin of mine told me this maybe 15 years ago. So Emperor Haile Selassie used to send students to European universities and universities in the US. So it was like a culture when these people graduated and came back to Ethiopia, he would host a dinner or something like that. And he would ask each and every individual that studied in the US or European universities, and there is this very popular incident where he asked a guy what he studied, and the guy apparently studied astronomy or something like that. But he answered the emperor that you wouldn't understand, something like that. So the emperor wisely said, "This you cannot call me on this because my cousin told me this." The emperor asked him to tell him like he would tell his help at home.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect way of understanding things.
Yep.
If you can explain it to your grandma or someone at home who is subservient to you, or who you consider is subservient to you,
or just old,
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I mean, I had I work with a lot of founders, and one of the biggest red flags for me, and I've only had a couple do it. It's actually not that common here. A lot of founders are lovely. Some of them have some stuff to learn, but incredibly passionate and smart kids, is when they say their customer is stupid. And I've only had two ever say this to me. Say, "Oh, well, my solution is great because this market is stupid." And if you think your customer is stupid, they're already solving the problem.
Yeah.
And just because you think you can do better doesn't mean they're going to believe you. Right. And that's one of my only real red flags, on a kind of personality level with founders, is if they seem arrogant about their market, whether their market is, top whoever software designer in Ethiopia, or my Buna lady. Right. And yeah, that's one of the few things I would see as a red flag.
All right. So talking about founders in Ethiopia, and you have this experience in different other African countries. So if you had to compare the Ethiopian founders with that of maybe Kenya, Uganda, or Rwanda, what kind of take do you have?
I would say, Kenyan founders are very much like Kenyans. So they're there's a certain way that Kenyans speak, how they carry themselves, that is very appealing, in particular to foreign investors. But that is not that common in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a kind of quieter culture, and one where the kind of self-promotion, and I say this because I'm from New York, I have more in some ways in common with Kenyans than with Ethiopians, but have learned something in 12 years, is for Kenyan founders, they're very good at doing that. And then you look at them and you can find the ones that are worth it, because there's founders that are worth it everywhere. Whereas, working with Ethiopian founders, and this is a debate I have with people in the investment space, is Ethiopian founders don't necessarily pitch great in the Western understanding. I think that doesn't matter. I think investors should figure out a way to understand Ethiopians. I think taking someone who is already working 85 hours a week to start their business and try and train them how to pitch to a couple of white people is weird. They don't need that. What they need is investors that are willing to understand them and how they pitch. And the best founders I know, okay, actually, there's a couple that are pretty good at pitching, but a lot of the best founders I know would, from a Western lens of investing, not stand up to a Kenyan. But if you look at the fundamentals of their business, the Ethiopians can be better and can have better companies. So, I think that's kind of a more of an issue with how investors look at Ethiopians. The other thing about Ethiopia is betam kebad now. And any founder who is still standing here after 5 years is going to be tougher, going to be probably melata, or like with Gray Sagur. I mean, founders that, are 30 and look 50, they will have gone through so much to keep that going, that the grit that Ethiopian founders have, if they have a good idea and if they haven't just been jumping from one development program to the next, those guys, long run, put them in like a squid game with Kenyans, they'll win.
The Kenyans?
No, the Ethiopians.
The Ethiopians?
Because they've been through so much.
Wow.
It's the business environment here is so much more difficult than Kenya and Rwanda, right? In Rwanda, it took me 2 days to start my company. I spend 2 days a year on compliance, all compliance for Rwanda. Let's just say it's not like that here. Kenya is somewhere in the middle. So if you find a founder that has survived and has gotten that far, they will be tougher, meaner, smarter than a Kenyan. Not saying Kenyans can't be, but they will, because you have to go through so much to succeed here. And they will really believe in it. Or they're using it to launder money, but that's another thing. So, you really will find really, really great founders here. I think one of the big issues for foreign investors, as we mentioned, is the currency issue. It's fantastic founders. If you come to me and say you're going to do 80% in Burr, I got to wait a couple years before I invest in you. That's not your fault, right? But Kenya doesn't face the currency issues, and Rwanda doesn't either. So if you've been able to survive that on top of that, on top of that, you are like the Incredible Hulk of all founders. And in the next couple of years, as the government's reforms come in, I think you'll start seeing some founders that have survived see the benefits of that, see the benefits of reduced inflation, see the benefits of the recent startup acts. There are guys out there that are poised to be able to really take advantage of that. And it's usually not the kids, right? It's maybe the kids in 5 years, right? But you go through so much to survive here that they could survive anywhere. We should send them all to Kenya. Now then the Kenyans would eat them. But you know what I mean.
All right. I understand. So do you think the Startup Act and things that steps that the government is taking would alleviate the problem that these founders are facing? Or do you have any other ways or suggestions that the stakeholders, including the government and others, could do to ease the whole process?
I think, I also, when I think about this, it's less at the level of a founder. I'm on the board of soon to be investment bank here. And I also look at it from the investor perspective a lot, because those are a lot of my clients. I think that all of this legislation and all of the movements the government is making in reform. So, everything from, the current agreements and the relaxation of monetary policy, changes in fiscal policy, reform at the commercial bank, SOE reform. All of these are huge things that this government is taking on. And it's, any government, if you succeed in 1/5 of this, you will have really transformed a lot in Ethiopia. The question is, can Ethiopia really change with 1/5, right? So it's changing within a very broad environment with a lot of reform. I have such respect for these people. For Baruch, for Mamo, for Eob, for everyone that is trying to drive these, because this is really trying to make a future for all of our liege that is better. I think within that, the Startup Act is kind of part of all of that. And I do think very specifically some of the provisions around investment size, tax holidays, et cetera, I think could be quite beneficial. My main thing on that is figuring out how to identify which startups should have it. Right. And, I'm American, so I'm usually less government interventionist, but, the figuring out how to push this forward, because if it starts getting abused, it'll get shut down. Right.
Yeah.
So it's figuring out how to implement it in a way where you really are identifying startups that can benefit from it. I think one of the other things about it, I think the Startup Act was motivated for a desire to create jobs. Startups don't usually create a lot of jobs. Mark Zuckerberg eventually created jobs, but the startup model isn't necessarily one that's job creation focused. So what I would love to see when you look at kind of broader reform would be, additional tax benefits for SMEs that have created a certain number of jobs, as opposed to kind of in tech. It's also, by the way, something that can be very easily monitored. So, for example, I'm a very small company, but we've moved from 1 to 5 employees. That might be too small for this benefit, but say you bring on 30 new employees in a year because you started a factory, some kind of tax credit directly related to job creation, even a tax credit on the taxes you pay on salaries for your staff. There's things you could do more broadly to try and encourage directly job creation as opposed to kind of start up an investment. And I think those could work together really well. I also, I realize tax reform is quite a difficult issue in Ethiopia. So I'm not sure, I might be on my soapbox for nothing. But I think you could really get benefit by trying to get a range of benefits within the society to promote what the society wants. And job creation really should be the focus of a lot of the government's effort, right? Job creation, trying to increase salaries to government workers, et cetera. That's what's going to transform the future of Ethiopia, right? I'm a foreign investor. Would I want a 5-year tax holiday so I can come in and set up my widget factory? Yes, but that's only one thing, right? A local investor with a small factory that could go from 12 staff to 25, if he was able to get a 10% tax break, that's a huge engine of growth. And that means you don't have to try and attract foreign investors that are just going to complain about not getting their dollars out, right? You're trying to build your local, medium enterprise sector. I think some considerations around that would be quite interesting. I also don't raise this very often because, tax reform is hard, and I don't. But I think you could bring in a range of things that could really focus where the focus should be.
So the things that you brought up and the things that you mentioned are really important, but can we contextualize what works for the economy of big countries, maybe in the West, and what works for African economy or country in Africa? Do you think that's the same?
I think policy-wise, there's, although who knows now with, the way government or global economy is going, but there's certain kind of economic policies that you could choose, which broadly across a whole set of global societies have worked, right? So I think trying to promote small to medium scale enterprise which I think in some countries happens on purpose, in some countries by accident, right? I think, China, a lot of the companies driving China's economy are like 10 employees or less, but they're export oriented, right? They set up a lot of advantages for manufacturing and export oriented manufacturing. I think that anything kind of related to job creation or export, which Ethiopia knows. I think that the real thing around a lot of this is the implementation, right? So, and I worked in Rwanda a long time ago on some stuff around their kind of tax reforms, et cetera. I know the case of South Africa quite well in terms of introducing SME flat taxes. Because, the one of the biggest issues, and I think most business owners in Ethiopia would agree, is not so much paying the tax. It's that, for me, my company's 5 people and we have a full-time accountant in addition to the 5, or mostly full-time. And then one of my staff, they're probably doing things related to some sort of compliance, taxation, et cetera, 60 days a year. That kills an economy, right? If you have a small business person, even smaller than me, a one-man show, he's going to be spending 20 to 40 days a year between ERCA, between data, between all of these things for compliance. And I think technology could really play a role there, right? But the implementation of the regulation is, I think, what can really hold up places like Kenya, like Ethiopia, et cetera. So, I think many people have had this. You go to any government, body. I'll give DARS as an example, and you spend 3 days at DARS for something that is in a law, like you can show them the law. And so I think the kind of time for compliance here. So that's not really a policy issue. That's kind of an implementation issue. It's also not only Ethiopia, right? That has that. I also think, the Ethiopian government has to try and do more with less, right? So this is a big country. It's a country with a lot of people. And, it's a country where, increasingly trying to build a tax base off of, the few formal tax people there are. And so really figuring out where the interventions matter, maybe working with whatever development partners are left. Sorry about USAID. Vote for him. It's okay. But really figuring out how to use that money effectively. And I know, there's great examples in Ethiopia, EDI, et cetera, that are really working with development partners to try and maximize. And these are incredibly difficult choices for this government. I would not want to be you. Sorry. But there is a role for the private sector to play in that. And so in some ways, if you regulate and tax less, you'll get more from the private sector, which is definitely something you see in Western economies. Maybe it wouldn't work here, but I don't know. I just don't want to spend that much time at Dara.
Sure. All right. You mentioned that the role of technology impacting the overall thing. So how do you measure it? Like, what kind of understanding do you have about technology and the impact it would have through the economy or everything in the economy?
Okay, so I'm private sector, so I don't measure impact.
Yeah, right.
But I know what you mean. I think, the easiest example everyone would give this is Telebird, right? And the transparency, et cetera, that is brought to interactions in Ethiopia is extraordinary. I think CBBR, all of these others are the same. I think there's certain sectors where technology can have a major impact very fast. Things like government, right? So now with FIDA and with various places where you can interact with technology within a government process, a lot of them you kind of interact to a point and then it's like, print this out and take it to, oh man, like so close. But that's real areas where you can bring efficiency. I think there's, looking at things like data, you're seeing, its potential in credit scoring. I think a lot of the banks are working on that. Kivia is working on it, et cetera. Those are areas that can have impact very fast, right? And impact that can be seen, right? You can see transaction volume, you can also see wealth creation, et cetera. Where I have concerns, and this is, also like the concerns that don't make me very popular in a lot of these kind of tech spaces, is there are also places where technology is not the main thing. It won't be the main thing, and it can't fix a lot. So a lot of the stuff in ag tech, right? Or in, I think ed tech's a little bit on the fence, right? I think kids getting access to kind of education through technology is incredible. Still hard though. Like you still have to get the kid to use it, et cetera. But where I find, there's a little bit too much exuberance is in things, as I said, ag, e-commerce. Okay, e-commerce isn't a website. Like the number of times I've had to say this because I worked in e-commerce, it was a huge failure. E-commerce is not a website. Like the e-commerce is your vendor control, your vendor negotiation, logistics, payment modalities. E-commerce is an incredibly sophisticated business, and you get a lot of people that think it's an app or think it's an app with a bike. And real e-commerce is not that. Ag tech, right? I have a client, absolutely love him. He's also partnered with me on a new company on Automart, and he's got this great app. Oh my goodness, it's great. It's one of the best apps. I love his app. We're working with him on B2B. You go to a restaurant, you go to a hotel, they don't care about the app. Mm-hmm. They care about on-time delivery, they care about good quality, and they care about cheap prices. The same things still matter, right? So a lot of these times people think tech is going to solve something. It can help. But if the core problem you're solving isn't a tech problem, you can't expect it to solve it, right? Health, right? Yes, telemedicine, et cetera, can have some impact, but those challenges are greater. Logistics, the challenge is greater. There's not enough trucks. So I think you always want to be careful when you look at tech. I think it can be really transformative. I would love to do here what I can do for my company in Kenya. In Kenya, no one in my company has been in a government office in 2.5 years. Everything we do is online. We file our taxes online. If there's issues, they raise them online. Everything we do, right? We didn't even have to do it when we founded the company. So I don't think we've ever actually visited a government office. If you're an Ethiopian entrepreneur, that was your porn. I just gave you a dream. So I think there's too much exuberance in sectors that really need more, or that are trying to replace things that it's much more difficult to replace than people think.
Amazing. Okay. How long have you been in Ethiopia? Maybe 10 years?
12
years.
I arrived July 2nd, 2013. So I'm coming up on my lidet.
Wow.
Yeah. My
12 years in Ethiopia.
Yes.
And
I'm actually 25. I came here when I was 14.
Amazing.
This is how you look. No,
Amazing.
I'm joking.
All right. So 12 years in Ethiopia and 2 or 3 years in some other African countries each, maybe?
6 years in Rwanda.
6 years in Rwanda.
And then I've been in and out. So actually for a year and a half, I worked between Kenya and Ethiopia.
All right.
And then also a bit in South Africa. And then very small in Uganda, Haiti, India, and Afghanistan.
All right. Amazing. So I understand that you like spending time or working in these African countries, but what made you stay longer in Ethiopia?
I think, in all seriousness, as I said earlier, the level of grit and the level of tenacity and intelligence and also devotion to Ethiopia that the founders and my own staff that I see and partners and people like you have for this country is truly inspirational, right? And a lot of the people I work with could leave and they're choosing not to, right? And that's extraordinary at a time like this. There is a level of spirit here and a drive here that I really would want all investors, including the Ethiopian government, who's an investor in its own future, including, development partners, including, anyone working it to really see. And it's also about, my experience also in Ethiopia is that if you are working with someone, whether they're a founder or whether they're a 23-year-old member of staff, and you don't just give them an opportunity, but you invest the time to mentor them, to learn from them, to listen to them, and to hold them accountable. The returns that you get and that they get are tremendous, right? And I think a lot of people stop, they kind of give opportunity, and then they don't realize that to train an extremely solid, good, strategic thinking middle manager takes 7 years. I know because I've done it many times in Ethiopia. And by the way, that's not different from Kenya and Rwanda. The base sort of talent level in Ethiopia is easily comparable to any market. But we all know this. I mean, do you remember your first job? What were you, 22? You were an idiot. I was an idiot. We're all idiots. Like, how are you expecting someone to suddenly become a managerial genius and the next CEO if no one has taken that time to invest in those years in making them into an adult and into a manager that is accountable to themselves and makes others accountable? So, and I find Ethiopians incredibly interesting and fun to work with in that process, which is why I've done it the number of times I have. And, you know, that's a level of investment a lot of programs aren't built for, right? You know, I'm being asked to train people in an hour. Like, I've spent 7-8 years on these people, but that investment pays off, right? So that's a definite reason. Then the weather, also, you know, why I stay. Arake, also a reason why I stay. And, you know, for me also, I've been here so long that I really want to find ways for foreign investors that might be quite intimidated by this market to find ways that they can be successful, whether they're an impact investor that wants to have an impact or, you know, commercial investors. I really want to partner with them to create more opportunities for Ethiopians, but also for those investors, right? Because that's why they're here. Also men, you know, my fiance is Ethiopian. He's pretty cute. Melita, you know, 6.5 years.
Wow.
So, you know, sticking around. He's not very exportable. He really likes it here. But you know, that's part of it. And he also is here because he wants to train Ethiopians and as well, he's an engineer. So, you know, those are the main reasons. Some days just the weather though. Depends on the day. But yeah, so so, you know, people that will put in a long-term commitment here, I think will really benefit. And I think, you think that as well.
All right. Okay. Let's go to the US and let's see the people that are having an impact in the economy and in the thinking of the people of the Western world as a whole. I'm talking about the tech geniuses and these big people now, billionaires. I sometimes doubt that working as an entrepreneur or investing in technology in those areas could work for a society like the US. And do you really believe that it could work for a society like Ethiopia the same way it does for the US or countries like Israel, maybe Britain and other countries that are really big in those areas?
I mean, I'm not entirely sure it's working in the States at the moment. Anyway,
politically, it's not.
Let me back in.
Politically,
I'm an American citizen. You can't ban me. I think that's an interesting question. I think also a lot of the kind of age, although I guess now we have AI, but I think the US is unique in being able to create technology that drives that kind of growth and wealth creation. Actually, now China as well. But it's also because of the size of their markets, right? So to be Google in the United States would be different than Google here. And obviously now Google is global. I think for Ethiopia, and I know some founders here that are positioning this way, it's not to say that Ethiopia can't build the next Google. I'm just saying that the chances are fairly low. Because also for an American, it would be, the chances are low, right? Even with AI, there's like 5 people that are benefiting from that in some ways. I think where there's real opportunity in tech in Ethiopia is in taking kind of those big movements in tech. So things like AI in any sector, right? From finance to healthcare. I mean, as far as I can tell, AI can do anything now. I don't know a lot about AI. I ask a lot of founders about AI and they laugh at me a lot. I get made fun of. But I'll ask all the dumb questions. I think for this and for anything in tech, the winners in Ethiopia may not be the next Facebook, but there aren't many of those left anyway globally. But it will be in figuring out how to take those tools and adapt them effectively to the Ethiopian market. And effectively, not in the way that a donor thinks, but in something that will actually work, right? Ride, right? I don't think Ride is ever saying that she invented ride hailing, but she took something and adapted it in a way that was effective for here, right? Telebur would be another example, but sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel and you don't need to be the next, God, I'm really old because I can't even remember the guy from AI. The founder of AI, OpenAI.
Sam Altman.
Thank you. Sorry. Dude, I load crates on trucks. I'm from Beverage, man. Like, I can barely get this screen lock off my phone. Like, my team has to find TikTok for me. But I think adapting it is where these companies will find opportunity. And then Ethiopia is a big enough market. You sell to them, right? Like, I know some of the smartest guys in AI here are building to be bought by Google or Facebook or one of these, right? And that's, I think, where the sort of, if you want a crazy exit, that's what you're looking at. But really bringing adaptation will add value, and it will also can be extremely lucrative, right? As I said, you're not going to be Sam Altman. My fiance's name is Sam. That just stuck in my head. Anyway, but you can generate, a business that will create maybe 50, 60 jobs and a good life for you and your family.
All right. Do you think we should be scared of AI as an Ethiopian?
I think also there's a lot of Ethiopians are deeply religious, and I think a lot of Ethiopians are responding to the kind of tensions that are brought up between this kind of artificial intelligence and religion. I won't have any comment on that. It's just where some of the conversations have focused that I've had. I think, everybody should be concerned about AI. I think the most sort of urgent for Ethiopia would be in skills development, right? And it's one where, you have a lot of people in Ethiopia saying, really trying to focus on, building BPO jobs or, all of that. And when you speak to people that actually understand the tech side, it is true. A lot of the lower skilled jobs are going to be gone, right? So now that creates a greater challenge for Ethiopians to build skills above that. But it's the same challenge in the States or in India, right? We all now have to figure out what skills aren't going to be replaceable by AI. And the loss of those jobs is real, right? That's not something that anyone can avoid. In terms of kind of the existential level of what AI could do, I don't fully, I guess I don't think about that often, or it doesn't give me a tremendous amount of anxiety. I also think there's huge benefits for Ethiopian AI in things, if you can match it with the right tools and interventions like healthcare, right? You now have, American medical doctors use this, right? To diagnose a patient, you can look at AI and you have access to hundreds of thousands of records to help you with your diagnosis, your prescription, to identify, problems that may happen in medical regimes. That's incredible, right? And also, it doesn't have to just be Ethiopian. This is one of the things when I deal with startups that are doing this in AI is I'm like, why does this data set only have to be Ethiopia, right? There are things that are broadly relevant. And I think in agriculture, right, with being able to understand things like soil conditions, et cetera, my issue then is there are a lot of structural issues and resource issues impacting ag. If my ag tells me X and I can't get any fertilizer because it hasn't shown up, and I can't, I don't have any medicines to help me with this disease or seeds, then the tech doesn't really help me. But I think the possibility for what AI could do in those sectors is incredible. And I also have purposely not answered your question because I honestly don't think that much about AI taking over the world. Maybe I should more. I have friends that are stressed about it. They're super nerds. I should probably listen to them. But I would say Ethiopia no more than any other kind of frontier economy should be concerned. And then everyone's worried. The States is worried about it as well.
All right. So this is going to be probably my last question if there is no follow-up. But do you ever regret engaging in beverage industry and now you are engaging in the other ecosystem of entrepreneurship, working with young people? Do you ever catch yourself thinking that I should have been in this place then and that one? Do you have any kind of regret?
Do you have regrets? I mean, Yelwinta, right? Ethiopians love regret. It's like many, many songs about it. I think regretting at that level, I doesn't really make, I don't have those particularly. Within kind of each, I have many things that I learned differently that I wish I'd learned from. And I think for me as well, never regretted beverage. Beverage is super fun. It's a super fun industry to be in. And it's also something where it's extremely immediate, right? If you make something and it works, you will see it, right? Takeshino, when we started that campaign, within 4 months, everyone referred to that drink as Takeshino, right? And also that name was not my idea. It was a brilliant brand guy that I was working with, idea for the name. And it works, right? Arada, we knew it worked because we could see people drinking it. I still get excited when I see people drinking it. And then I check if it's cold because it's not that good warm. I'm like, what are you doing? Don't mess with my... And then I think one of the things I get asked a lot now is, and I briefly, was kind of a GP of a fund, and a lot of people want me to move into the investment side. And it took me a lot of time thinking about that. And as I've engaged with and, been in the consulting side, et cetera, is I think a lot of people think that, because I have a skill set for it, I should do it. I don't really like it. Like running a fund is sexy. There's a time when everyone had a fund, and I think those days are kind of dying. I think there's too much capital and too few operators. I actually like being an operator, right? I would much rather be, in a discussion with a recruitment company in the States talking about Ethiopian nurses, or wandering around on a farm that is somehow figuring out how to make avocado oil, than talking about raising a fund or, how much return we're going to get, or, what we're looking at. Right. And the decision to stay an operator, I think a lot of people find quite weird, because usually at my age, everyone wants to be on the capital side. But I really don't. I like doing what I do, even though it's hard. But if people aren't willing to do the hard things, there's nowhere for the capital to go. And that's one that I think a lot of people thought would be a future regret that isn't. And I do get asked about Ethiopia a lot. I mean, it's, a lot of investors, are careful about this market or have exited, et cetera. And to me, it was always going to be a long-term play. And Ethiopia still is a long-term play. And that's not just semantics that the government is saying. There is huge potential here. And, the people I get to meet and interact with every day, what they're going through, their toughness and what they want to bring, that's a reason to stay. Depending on the day and how much I've interacted with, various actors in government, that's the only reason I'm still here.
All right.
Doors. Erica, just kidding. You're all awesome. But no, it's incredibly inspirational.
All right. So let me end with this. Do you have one inspiration that you draw from Ethiopians? Do you have something that makes you say, I have to do this because I learned this thing from here? Do you have anything like that?
There is no grit like Ethiopian grit, right? Ethiopian grit is born from, what is it? The thing you do after any holiday when you slaughter the cow all together and the dudes hang out and they share it with the blood. It's that grit with mud. If you're rising out of that, you're going to be one of the most interesting, because you're passionate about your market. and one of the toughest people out there, right? So I definitely take that inspiration from Ethiopia. Clearly not fashion or makeup advice, because I've never will win here. Gave up on that a while ago. But I would definitely say that, and the ability to constantly do hard things and keep doing it, and building the relationships and to move forward and make it work.
Amity, this was a very interesting conversation, and I hope it will not be our last conversation. We'll be having
someone should interview you for the podcast at some point, by the way. Anyway.
All right. Several of this conversation. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. I'm a second.
But it's just all right.